like, you want the $2 wedding or the $10 wedding? I'm guessing you want the $2 wedding, but I prepared the $10 wedding. So, and I'm a recovering history professor, so it's my first class really since retiring in May. So I'll share a few thoughts in this hallowed space that we're in here in Holland Park. I know you walk through History Hill, and so you know something about that story, and I'll reference it here as well. So this is called Labor Day, a historical and personal reflection, 2021. Amid this pandemic, we're reminded how we all depend on the labor of those who produce our food, keep our grocery stores and restaurants running, deliver essential services, and profoundly work around the clock to keep our hospitals and healthcare facilities running. My interest in working men and women began in my household growing up in Eastern Oregon. My dad worked for the Union Pacific Railroad. He was a member of the Brotherhood of Railway Carmen's Union. He eventually became a national officer in that union. My distance travel as a youngster was on the Union Pacific trains to union conventions in Denver, Salt Lake City, Portland, and Seattle. And a newspaper entitled Labor was delivered to our home, and it introduced me to union issues at an early age. A newspaper entitled Labor Story remained a central part of my history classes at Albion College. And it was also my honor here to host various labor leaders, including the legendary Cesar Chavez, who co-founded the United Farm Workers and led great lettuce boycotts, marches, and hunger strikes. So this is Labor Day, and you ask, how did Labor Day come to be? So keep in mind the American story. When the United States was born, it was a farmers' republic, an agricultural society. Following the Civil War, industry, corporations, factories, and cities began to take center stage. Jefferson's yeoman farmers were being replaced by wage workers. America was torn apart by the battle over chattel slavery during the Civil War. Following the Civil War, there were great fears that wage slavery might lead to another civil war, a class war of workers versus the capitalists. In the late 19th century, there were numerous strikes and labor capital confrontations. It has been argued that America's labor history is the bloodiest among the industrialized nations. Well, some of that violence, expressive violence from the bottom up, was from the workers. Most of the violence, repressive violence from the top down, was directed by the corporate owners in the form of hiring private armies of Pinkerton detectives, the strike breakers, and by alliances with the police, militia, and National Guard. The idea of celebrating a September Day for labor in America can be traced back to 1882. Commemorations were localized, city level and state level. On May 4th, 1886, a union strike for the 8-hour day in Haymarket Square in Chicago turned violent. Some labor leaders advocated for May Day as the day to honor labor in memory of Haymarket. May Day was linked by many to socialism, anarchism, and the more radical side of the movement, the labor movement. The deadly strike at the Pullman Palace Car Company in Chicago was a catalyst for Congress and President Grover Cleveland, wanting to avoid any association with the radical May Day, to pass and sign into law on June 28th, 1894, the first Monday in September date as a national holiday. And now, 127 years later, we honor this date. Labor Day is the result of workers' movements to form unions to gain fair wages and decent working conditions. The struggle has been long, with many setbacks. It was not until Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal in the 1930s that the government backed the workers' right to organize a union. For Roosevelt, the system in which bosses could unilaterally decide the hours men and women worked, the wages they received, the conditions of their labor, amounted to dictatorship. He hoped the New Deal would bring workers and managers together in a new form of workplace governance. New Dealers believed in industrial democracy. To achieve this, they relied on unions. Supported by law, for the first time in American history, the union movement flourished during the Great Depression, World War II, and the post-war era. Well, where does Albion fit in the story? Early in its history, Albion embraced the Industrial Revolution. Gale Manufacturing and the Albion Malleable Iron Company were the magnets for drawing first European immigrants and later African American and Latino migrants. And just as the embrace of Albion for industry, the Gale started where the Ludington Center is now, on Superior Street, spewing out cinders and smoke. And when they moved across town, that brick building over there is the last office building from the Gale, the last remaining part of it. The Malleable was created and moved in on Superior Street, where the Ludington Center is today. And when it outgrew that, it moved to that quadrant. Gale was over here, the Malleable there, and now we have the Ludington Center. Downtown, so the Great War, World War I, stopped the immigrant flow of workers to America. So it cut off that pool of workers that had been working at supply workers for the Gale and the Malleable. So they still needed workers. The industry was ramping up because of the war, and the Malleable then went south to recruit workers. And the first 64 black men arrived at the Albion train station in November of 1916. Their families soon followed. This was the beginning of Albion's entry into what is known as the Great Migration. African Americans leaving the South to the North. So you have the outline, and some of that story is explained on History Hill, and this became an African American and immigrant community, and factories were close by, and so there's more to this than just the labor part, the community and churches here, Bethel Baptist and Lewis Chapel, and the Westward School. I returned to Labor Day. Albion was an industrial town. It was a working class town, a laborer's town. When New Deal America leaned toward favoring unions, did Albion join in? Malleable workers were organizing to form a union in 1934. Following a strike in the summer of 1937, the Malleable management agreed to recognize the International Molders and Foundry Workers Union of North America. Later, the Malleable workers switched to the UAW, United Auto Workers. Albion's boom years were the 1950s and 1960s. Jobs were plentiful, working conditions were more humane, and wages and benefits more equitable because Albion became a union town. Albion can be proud of its rich labor and union legacy. As Albion modeled the Industrial Revolution earlier, it became the poster city, among many, for deindustrialization began with the closing of Corning Glass in in 1975, followed by McGraw-Edison, Union Steel, Brooks Foundry, and the Malibu, which by that time was called Harvard Industries. Malibu closed in 2002 after 114 years. Union membership around the country peaked in the 1950s at 35% of workers and has slumped to about 10% today. Michigan, famous for the Flint sit-down strike, Walter Reuther, and the UAW, and its union membership is now a right-to-work state, reflecting anti-union state laws. So on Labor Day 2021, the struggle for a living wage and the dignity of labor continues. Working men and women have played an indispensable role in the efforts of we the people to make a more perfect union. And union takes on a double meaning here. Although most of the Albion factories of the boom years today are ghosts, including the Gale and the Malibu, the Mulder statue across from the post office reminds Albion of its labor history. The sculptor included a quote from the poet James Russell Lowell. This is described on the Mulder from Lowell. No man is born unto the world of work whose work is not born with him. There's always work and tools to work with those who will. And blessed are the thorny hands of toil. The Mulders fought for better working conditions. They fought to have a union. Although times have changed in Albion and America, we can be thankful for the benefits that unions have brought Albion and all Americans. And to quote a labor song, I'm sticking to the union till the day I die.